So, so Stave 2 is about the reflection, the remembrance of the past. And therefore, it's a question about what's the value, what's the meaning of your past. You all have a past. You all have a history. The history seems fixed, right? The past is, in some ways, it's fixed, right? What's one of the things that the spirit, the ghost of Christmas past, says a couple times to Scrooge? These are shadows of what. Anyone remember this? These are shadows of what has been, that they are. You remember how it goes? That they are what they are. What is it?
I don't know what specifically, but it's something about how it's always going to be that way.
Yeah, it's always going to be that way. That they are what they are. And he says, don't blame me for it. Don't blame me for if you don't like what you see in your past, don't blame me, right? Because the idea is the ghost is just showing what is. Hey, and when you think back on your memories, and in one sense, like, don't blame the memories. The memories are just reporting to you what there is. You might not like it, right? That's okay not to like the past, but it's sort of like, but there's a value to it still, regardless of whether you like it or not. There's a meaning, a significance on the reflection of the past. So this is kind of the point of Stave 2, is Scrooge is coming to an awareness of himself by being able to remember how he was, right? If you want to know what you are, you got to know, in some sense, what you were. Because what you are is kind of the product. It's the result of what you were. And so there's a little mix of hope when you look at Scrooge's past, and a lot of tragedy and despair, right? But it's a mix. There's still some hope there, because Scrooge does have some really good memories, right? Which sort of indicates that in Scrooge's life, he does have experiences of the meaning of life. He does know what it is to live a happy life, a good life, a joyful life. He has done it, right? I mean, you look back in his past and you see that. But what happens is you can become forgetful of that. So you have remembrance and you have forgetfulness as two ways two attitudes, two approaches towards your past. You can remember it or you can forget it. And I think what we're going to see as this goes is Scrooge completely forgot his past. He completely forgot it all. And things that were really important, he just forgot that they were important. And when you forget that they're important, they no longer become important, right? So it's like, this is a really painful thing to have this woman break up with you because you love your job more than you love her. And that's painful. And one way to deal with the pain is to forget it, right? And so he just sort of, forgets it. And rather than that solving his problem, it actually compiles it. And he gets worse and worse and worse as time goes on. And so what you find is the ghost of Christmas past returns to Scrooge. It's like his past returns to him so that he can finally, with clear eyes, see what he is. Right? It's once again, like we saw with Marley, Scrooge doesn't want to confront his death. He doesn't want to admit that he's something that can die. Likewise, Scrooge doesn't want to confront his past. He doesn't want to confront the fact that this is what he is, this is what he was, this is what he's lost. No one wants to remember, hey, here's what I could have had, but I lost. Right? You want to remember all the good things and not the bad things. And it turns out for Scrooge, and maybe for all of us, if you forget the bad things, you're also likely going to forget all the good things. Like, you have to, in some sense, recognize that your past, whether good or bad, is essential for understanding what you are at present now. Right? So it seems that the past is fixed, but one of the great questions that develops in Staves, well, 3, 4, and 5, the remaining ones, is it actually fixed? Is the meaning of your past, is that actually fixed, or can it be changed? Here's a scenario, very, suppose there's some event that happens in the past, you do something that's really harmful to someone, that really hurts someone, and it's in the past, and what's done is done, and therefore you might think, I can't change that fact. But whether this is part of a good story or a bad story, is not something that can be simply determined by an evaluation of that event unto itself. Whether this event is part of a good story or a bad story is going to depend on the rest of the story, where that event led to, right? And so here's what we'll see when we move into Stave. Really, it's like 4 and 5 of the book, is that the past gets redeemed. We saw this with the death of Ivan Ilyich too. The past can get redeemed, which means it gets a new interpretation. It gets a whole new meaning, a whole new significance. And so it's like all the things that Scrooge lost, we're going to see that here pretty soon, that actually serves a really good, meaningful purpose, and it's partly what accounts for why Scrooge, everyone knows, because everyone's seen the movie versions of this, is why Scrooge becomes so joyful and able to really be grateful for existence, right? It's because he realizes everything he's lost, he can become grateful for existence. And therefore, the events that seem to be fixed, you can't change the physical facts of it, the nature of it, but the significance of it can change. At one point, it meant death, but at another point, it means life. Which is actually, I mean, once again, this is a Christmas carol. There's a lot of Christian themes woven in and out of the whole thing. And this is really the only way you can understand like Christianity, right? I mean, this is the whole point of the crucifixion and all that, right? It seems like it's a really bad event, but it becomes, the symbol of death is the symbol of life, right? The things in the past that were Scrooge's death, the loss of his joy in life, become actually capable of giving rise to a new life. Uh-huh.
So you're basically saying that like the things in the past are fixed unless you change your interpretation of the things that went on in the past?
Yes, you have. So what does it mean? So I suppose like I hurt someone really bad, not necessarily physically, but like you do something to someone that really like crushes them. And now, like, I mean, this could be something like, I mean, there's stories that are like really like ways that people can really screw people's lives up, you know, abuse and what have you. And like, how could you ever make good of that? How can you ever fix that problem that's happened in the past? One way of thinking of it is, well, you can't change it. It is what it is. You can't, it is what it is, you know, as the ghost keeps saying again and again. There's nothing you can do about that. But I think what the story is trying to propose is, if you simply just focus on it as a past event, you're stuck with it. But what does it mean? Is that going to be part of the story of depression and isolation and whatever? Or is that going to be part of the story of, I don't know, you can think about like, it's because of that motivates people to like do stuff in life, do good stuff, right? And it's like they would never have done those really good, noble, selfless acts if it wasn't for this painful, ugly thing that happened in the past. And as soon as they kind of forget that painful, ugly thing that happened in the past, they kind of lose the motivation for doing good. Does that make sense? And so it's like, you care about the good, so don't pay attention to the bad. And I think what's happening here in Scrooge is, it's only by him first recognizing the pain that his whole life, that he's caused himself in his life, once he becomes aware of that, he now is, he wants a different life. Like, I hate the life that I've given myself, and I don't want it anymore. And so it's kind of this paradox of like, you have to really understand the bad if you're going to have some motivation for something else, for the good, right? And no one wants to think about the past and all the things they've lost and all the people they've hurt and all the things that they've squandered. no one really wants to think about that. It makes you feel bad and like a loser and all that. But the whole point of Stave 2 is it's necessary. You've got to start with that if you're going to have a redemption, if you're going to have a rebirth, I don't know, however you want to put it, a conversion, if you're going to find a new life, whether that's, an afterlife. But I think the point of this is you can't experience an afterlife while you're living. I mean, that's what we call conversion. That's what we call, moving from being selfish to being charitable and generous. Right? That's you're living a different life. Okay, so that I think is why this is the Ghost of Christmas Past. And the Ghost of Christmas Past is depicted as having a light on his head, and it's because it's shedding light, it's illuminating what is. The thing that Scrooge has forgotten is himself. He's forgotten his life. He's forgotten his whole history. And so it's like the Ghost of Christmas Past is this light bulb that's like able to kind of come down and shed light on all this. And so now Scrooge can kind of, from a perspective that is where he is now, he can come back and he can look at the past. We'll see a bunch of examples of one of the values of this, of reflecting on your past, is that it's a judgment on how you are now. So if I think back on how I was, that's a judgment on how I am now. Maybe I'm better than I used to be, or maybe I'm worse than I am. But it's a comparison, right? To think on the past, you're comparing. You got to compare your former self with your present self. And that happens again and again and again. And one thing you see is as you go further back, Scrooge, like early on in his life, he is he's less like how should I write this? He's less like his current self, right? In some sense, and those aspects of it, right? He's kind of alone and what have you. But there's a lot of joy in Scrooge's life, and as he gets closer to the present, what happens is he loses that joy, and he starts to love things, like specifically in this context, right? Money, wealth, his occupation, right? You can think about, someone who finds it's more important for me to think about what's happening at my work than what's happening at home. So you go home, and all of a sudden you start thinking about what's going on at work, and I got these things to do, and I got those things to do, and those are more important. And your kids are like, hey, I got to go to baseball practice, and you're like, no, I gotta, and you're just like, it's almost like there's more value, more importance wrapped up in work than in that. And I think what Scrooge is coming to this realization of is that's what happened to him. He used to know clearly what the meaning of existence was, and as he got older, he forgets, such that now he's realizing, I've forgotten what it means to be alive. I've forgotten what it means to be happy. I forgot how that happens. But when he reflects back, he can remember what he's forgotten. That's the great paradox, right? You can remember what you've forgotten. And again and again and again throughout Stave 2, the Spirit's going to say, hey, do you remember this? And Scrooge is like, remember it? Hell, I was there. I did it, right? And it's this paradox, because then the Spirit comes in and says, well, if you remember it, isn't it funny how you forgot that fact? Right? Like if you could walk this blindfolded, like if you remember all these kids' names and why you were so happy with them, isn't it funny how you forgot that? And so he's trying to show that to remember something is to remember what you've forgotten, right? And therefore, it's almost like a reawakening.
It kind of reminds me of the part of William James on happiness. How one of the notes I got from it is that jobs cannot make you fully happy.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a lot similar between the two books that were for the class.
Yeah. And there's definitely an overlap, because I think what William James was trying to argue on the certain blindness of human beings was we can get stuck into one particular, I'll just call it value system, one particular way of valuing the world and life, such that we become completely oblivious to any other value, any other goods that can be had. This is jumping ahead a little bit, but at the Fezziwig party, Scrooge is able to look in on that and see all the joy, see all the happiness, and he's taking so much delight in all that. And then all of a sudden, the Spirit says something like, it costs so little to make people so happy. And so then Scrooge is all of a sudden like brought back to the fact that, wait, yeah, this does cost a lot of money to do this. But then he has this awareness, but maybe it's worth it. Right? Maybe it's worth making people happy for, I think the equivalent, the exchange, or I was doing a little research, once again, 10 seconds. My research, attention span's about 10 seconds. So he spends a couple pounds, which I think roughly translates to a couple $100, several $100 or so, for this party. He throws this big Christmas party, Fezziwig does. And Scrooge is sort of like, maybe it's worth it. Maybe there's a different sense of value, goodness. Maybe money isn't the most important thing. Maybe what's happening with that whole scene is worth the couple $100 that it cost to give it. And so he's sort of forgotten that type of good that joy is. And then eventually he comes to this realization that maybe joy is worth any amount of money, right? And that's kind of the wake-up call for Scrooge, is that maybe I've been spending my life earning wages and spending it on things that don't actually satisfy me. Okay, but we need to, let's jump back. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Stave 2 begins with Scrooge waking up, and when he wakes up, what's that situation scenario described? How is it described? He wakes up, and what happens to him?
He realizes that he must have slept through the day because it's still night.
Yeah.
It's still night outside. Nothing's changed, and it's really cold.
Yeah, because he went to bed. I think he said it was like 2 or so, and he wakes up and it's 12. He's like, what the hell? What time is it? Right? Did I sleep through the whole day? Right? It's 12. How could it be 12? I went to bed at 2. And so he's really perplexed. What time is it? Maybe it's actually noon and something happened with the sun, which is really kind of, he's really puzzled by this. And then he thinks the clock's broken. So he goes over to the clock and he hits the repeater, which I think is the thing that tells you, dings and tells you the time. And it turns out, no, it is actually midnight, or it's 12. And he's just perplexed. So you get a 1.5-page depiction of how Scrooge is so perplexed about what time it is. All right, this is really important. Why? Because the next 3 chapters are going to be chapters about, chapter 2 is about the past. Chapter 3 is about the present. Chapter 4 is about the future. Right? And so in order for Scrooge to kind of return to a view of the past, present, and future, he has to begin by this recognition of I don't know what the hell, I don't know what time I'm living in. I don't know anything about my life. Right? So I think this is a depiction of Scrooge coming to the realization. I mean, obviously, Dickens is putting this in the story, and then you have to kind of interpret it. It's not merely for the sake of I need to fill some pages because I have to turn this into my professor, and I need to have 1,000 words. And no, there's a whole point for why Dickens wrote all this stuff, and it is supposed to symbolize things. And once again, the point of all of these reflections is not to try to get Charles Dickens right, but to just reflect for our own sake. And so the way that I interpret this is that Scrooge, in order to even ask the question, what is the meaning of my history, my past? What's the meaning of my future? What's the meaning of the current life that I'm living? You have to begin with this awareness of I don't know. I don't know what it means, right? And I think that's why Scrooge is shown to be at a timeless place right here. He's timeless, right? That's one way to think of this. He doesn't exist in time. He's completely baffled and confused by that. And then it's only in virtue of these ghosts that they're going to kind of give him a better sense of what it means to live, what it means to have life, what it means to have a history, what it means to have a present moment, what it means to have a future, because Scrooge has forgotten the meaning of all that stuff. Does that kind of make sense? So it's he has to admit his ignorance before he comes to a new awareness. Okay, anyway, there's that. The ghost comes, has the light. We talked about that. The ghost is also described, and we've already mentioned this a little bit, as having these contradictory qualities. Child, but also kind of like an old man. Very strong hand, strong arms, but a very gentle, delicate touch. Right? At one point, the ghost grabs Scrooge by the arm. Super strong hands, but grabs Scrooge's arm in a very delicate way. Once again, also the ghost is holding a branch of holly, but at the same time, in singular contradiction, as it's put on page 29, in contradiction of that wintry emblem, the holly branch, it had a dress that was trimmed with summer flowers, so winter and summer, child and old man. So it's almost like your past contains almost everything about your life so far. Everything, good, bad, ugly, positive, negative, whatever you want, it's all contained in your past. All contradictions. You wanted to do this, but you didn't do it. Everything is kind of sucked up into your past. And so that's why the ghost is depicted in this way, as being this kind of contradictory creature. Tall and large, old and young, right? At one point, kind of joyful and other times serious. Okay, another important feature of the whole setup of this is on page 29. Here, someone read this. This is on page 29, about 2/3, 3/4 of the way down. It's the paragraph that begins with, "Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody," and then going on. All right, go for it, Quinn.
Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why. If anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cat and begged him to be comfortable.
Okay, real quick. We'll keep going here in a second. But so Scrooge, he's not sure why, but he desires the spirit to put his cap on. What do you think that's supposed to signify? What's so special about that? To cover up the light. Scrooge doesn't want to confront his past, right? It's sort of vaguely, intuitively, it's like, I'd rather keep this hidden. I'd rather not think about this. I'd rather not think about all the pain that's in my past, because once I start to do that, I realize how ugly my life is, how painful my life is, and I'd rather just not do that. And so Scrooge wants to have that cap put back on the ghost's head. Okay, keep going.
"What," exclaimed the ghost, "would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? It is not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and forced me through the whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow."
Okay, good. So what was the cause of this cap? Why does the ghost of Christmas past why is he forced to wear this cap? Who made this cap? I mean, this is all like kind of symbolic language here. But who made it? People. Specifically one of them, Scrooge. And how did Scrooge make it? This is, if you're a reader of Plato's Republic, you find this maybe interesting. It's his what? Passions. It's his passions that form this cap, which is like, why do we forget the past? Why do we forget our life? Why do we forget what is significant to us? And it's our passions. We get wrapped up in, as Plato would put it, worldly affairs. Basically externals. We think that joy comes from money. We think that joy comes from external stuff, the passion, and that's what causes us to forget the real source of joy. Is I think what Dickens is depicting here, right? And then they again and again also throughout the stave, the ghost of Christmas past is telling Scrooge, this is biblical language, to rise and walk, right? Like rise up, right? Is basically telling him to like, you're dead, rise up, come on, let's keep going, right? So once again, it's almost as if Scrooge is dead. That's how he really is in his bah humbug state. The Scrooge we see in Stave 1 is a dead man. He's a living dead man, right? And that's kind of what Marley's saying. Hey, Scrooge, wake up. You're dead. You're just like me, except you can't see the chains that you wear, but you're just as dead as I am. You're just waiting for your heart to stop. And so the ghosts of Christmas past, and actually all the other ones, are going to be trying to like bring him back to life. They're trying to bring him back to life, which is back to his life. Wake up to what your life really was, is, and is going to be. And so this is, the imagery that Dickens is using of resurrection, right? It's the image of resurrection here. Once again, this is on that line on page 30, right in the middle. So they get to the window. Scrooge is getting ready to go out the window, but it's like, wait, I'm going to fall. And the ghost says, hey, don't worry about it. Touch my hand. Here's what it says. Bear but a touch of my hand there, said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, and you will be upheld in more than this. So it's sort of like you won't just be resurrected, held up by physical holding up so you don't fall to the ground and die, but it's almost like the significance, I think, of getting to the heart of the past is a depiction of Scrooge's past. If you get to the heart of that, you'll be upheld, you'll be resurrected in more than just this physical sense of being upheld, right? So this is a story of resurrection, I think. But in order to have a resurrection, you got to know how you died. You got to know how you died and that you died, and this is what Scrooge doesn't want to face. But in virtue of going back to the past and seeing all this, he realizes this is the story of his death. Right? At the very end, it's a very tragic scene, but he finds himself out of touch with everything that used to give him joy. And so that's kind of how the whole past is depicted. And the value of the past is it provides the grounds for the possibility of resurrection. It helps you to see how and where you have died. Okay, so they go back to the school where Scrooge used to go when he was a boy, and the scene is depicted as once he went there, he was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys, cares long, long forgotten. So he goes back to this early period of his life, and all this stuff is brought back to him. Things that he just, it's almost like he enters a different world. I don't think that way anymore. I don't take joy in that anymore. And he's able to go back and he's able to find that actually there was something about life that was significant that he doesn't have now, right? And that's where he gets the, hey, do you remember the way? And Scrooge says, remember it, I could walk it blindfolded. And then the spirit says, strange to have forgotten it for so many years, right? If you can walk it blindfolded, isn't it funny how you've forgotten all these good things? These are but shadows of things that have been, right? They have no consciousness of us. We can see them, but they can't see us. They can't see the future, but we can reflect back on them. Okay, so we'll just kind of skip around a bit. And then what happens? There's another Christmas a little bit later. Who comes to visit Scrooge when he's at school? The sister, and her name is Fan or Franny or something like that. And what's going on in that scene? What does she do? She comes to tell Scrooge something. Ebenezer. We'll call him Ebenezer. Although that's not a great kid's name, I guess. Ebby? We'll call him Ebby. What's the message that she brings him? She's going to bring him home, right? Which once again is like there's a lot of biblical imagery in a lot of this, right? She's coming to tell him that he's going to be brought home. And he basically has all these memories of her as just a kind person, loving person. And then we'll kind of cut through some of the details of all that scene there. But then at the very end, the spirit interrupts and says, I want someone to read this. It's on page 34. It's the paragraph that begins with, always a delicate creature, and kind of that little exchange there. Does someone want to read that? And it takers. This is right where they start talking about the... Yeah, go for it.
Always delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered, said the ghost, but she had a large heart. So she had, said Scrooge. You're right. I will not gainsay it, spirit. God forbid. She died a woman, said the ghost, and had, as I think, children. One child, Scrooge returned. True, said the ghost, your nephew. Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly, yes,
Okay, good. We'll leave it right there because then they leave that scene. That's the last they have of that scene. So you find out that this sister of Scrooge dies, has this nephew, and we know. And so here's where you can kind of put two and two together in a way. Like, so Scrooge had this experience with his sister, remembers it, and now he's treating his nephew, her son, as like a complete stranger, right? So the contrast, this is once again, I think, the point of it. It's like the contrast of Scrooge now, that's like little miserly Scrooge. When he's able to reflect back on the past, here's like the little boy, little boy Scrooge, right, in the past. He's able to judge himself in light of that, right? So this is the contrast. This is me, and this is me, right? And this becomes a judge of himself. Your past is able to judge you. It's kind of like if someone says, "Hey, don't be so lazy." You're not going to perhaps take that to heart, but if you kind of remember yourself telling yourself yesterday, "Don't be so lazy," somehow it kind of gets internalized a little bit, and it kind of hurts a little bit more because you realize you're capable of judging yourself. And so the whole point of this reflection is it's no one else is telling Scrooge that he's living a loser life, a dead life. It's Scrooge coming to the awareness for himself that he's living a dead life, right? He's right. It's almost like no one can tell you. No one can force you to be serious about something. Like, hey, take this seriously. No one can force you into that. You have to kind of make that decision for yourself. Likewise, no one can reflect on your past for you. No one can examine your conscience for you. You have to do it of yourself, which means like you've got to see all these other things as capable of judging you, which is Marley's ghost. Scrooge sees himself in Marley, and so that's why Marley's ghost is able to make this judgment on Scrooge. All these past Scrooges have the ability to make this judgment on Scrooge. And it's in virtue of that he's able to feel like he is now he's now dead. He's able to realize it's because he looks at this and he realizes what he doesn't have or what he lacks, what he this type of joy, this type of gratitude for life that he now knows he doesn't have, he's lacking, and that kind of pains him. Right? This is, before we jump ahead to the Fezziwig scene, this is when he's looking at all those boys at school and they're all having fun and they're all playing, and it's presumably it's these like from this like poor family where he went to school. He says, this is on 32-33. "I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cuff, "but it's too late now." Right? So he's wishing something, but then he realizes it's too late. I can't do anything about it. "What's the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge, "nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all." So remember, it's Stave 1, there's that Christmas carol that comes, and Scrooge basically kicks him down the street, tells him to shut up and stop annoying people. And now Scrooge is finally realizing, I should have done something differently about that. Right? And he's able to do that because he's able to put himself in the shoes of that poor little, boy who was singing that song. It's as if he was only thinking about the world from his own shoes as a rich, wealthy business owner who has, his projects and his plans. And it's not until he can put himself in the shoes of other people that he is able to have some sort of compassion for them. And so when he reflects on the past, he's able to kind of see the world differently because he's able to see himself in all these other characters. Because he was just like they were. It's kind of the depiction that's had here. And there's a lament because he can't do anything about it now. Right? This is a tragedy. He wishes he could go back in the past and like not have been so mean to that little kid. He was just a little poor kid trying to make a little bit of money by singing Christmas songs to make people happy. And Scrooge was a great jerk and kicked him down the road. Scrooge is like, I wish I could go back and do it differently. And the ghost of Christmas past says, well, sorry, you can't. Right? You made that decision, and it's done. And so it's kind of like this great lament is being built. As Scrooge moves more to the present, the weight, the chains, so to speak, of his selfishness sort of get heavier and heavier and heavier. He feels his selfishness heavier and heavier and heavier as he gets closer to himself in time. Okay. So then you get Fezziwig, and Fezziwig's an important character because he's basically like a version of Scrooge because he owns a business that's basically the exact same sort of business as Scrooge is, or very similar. And he has clerks working for him, and you get the contrast between the way Scrooge was towards his clerk, Bob Cratchit, and the way Fezziwig was towards his clerk, which was Scrooge, right? So here now you get this reflection of like, here's old Fezziwig. Fezziwig's kind of this guy that has a big beer sign. I kind of think of this guy looks like happy guy. He's like wearing this like Santa hat. I think Fezziwig's sort of a party animal. And then here's like Scrooge over here, the clerk, and it's like, music and joy and everything. Okay. And this guy is depicted on the cover of here, right there, dancing with his wife. But the way that he's depicted is completely different from the way Scrooge is. This guy, it's as if his whole fiscal year was for the sake of preparing for this great big party, this great big Christmas party, where he could spend a bunch of money, shut everything down, and finally get to real business. The real business of having this, epic Christmas party with lots of joy and singing and all the way it's depicted is just pretty incredible. And everyone comes, right? This is what's awesome is everyone comes in. Doesn't matter who you are, the baker, you could be the cook, you could be the brother of the milkman, or it doesn't matter. You're coming to this party. Everyone's coming into this party. You can think of it as just completely packed. People are dancing. No one's doing it right. Everyone's messing up. Everyone's drinking beer and just having a grand old time, laughing and all this sort of stuff. Listening to our favorite little song that we listened to at the beginning. Okay, so that's the scene that's depicted. And as Scrooge is looking back on this, he has this sense of remembering the joy, the gratitude that he experienced. He sort of like remembers the meaning of life. It's like, well, yeah, I remember how good life used to be, how enjoyable life used to be. And once again, this memory is both a joyful thing, but it's also a tragedy because it's always going to be in contrast to the present. To reflect on the past is always to put it in contrast to the present, or in comparison to the present, at the very least. Here's how it's put on page 37. During this whole time, so Dickens gives you this long depiction of this scene, which I'll won't say anything else about, but during this whole time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. Like he was just completely full of joy. He was acting like a child again, like the giddiness of a little boy who was able to take these delights and the simple things in life. His heart and soul were in the scene and with his former self. So it was almost as if looking back, he's able to re-experience the joy that he had back here, and he's taking so much delight in this. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and then here's the tragedy that's always here in memory, and underwent the strangest agitation. Right? So why is he agitated? Because this is the past. This isn't present joy. This is past joy. It's like you stop and you think about how wonderful it was when you used to do what you're not doing now, right? It's like, yeah, there's joy in that, but here's the pain. You're not doing that now. Think about how great it was when you used to spend time with your brother, and you remember, but he's dead, right? There's joy in the past, but the pain is that it's not present. And this is the this is once again the contrast, the comparison, the judgment that Scrooge is able to make of himself by looking at the past. There was joy there, and I don't have it. Does that make sense? And which is to say, there was life here, and I know that I'm dead. There was a lot of life there. There was warmth there, and now I'm cold, I'm dead, I'm in a freezing office, right? So the remembrance is a remembrance of life, and therefore, at the same time, to remember life is to recall the fact that perhaps, maybe not for all people, but for Scrooge at least, to remember that you used to have a life means that you're now currently dead. You're empty, right? You the things that you think fulfill you don't fulfill you, because you remember what life could have been, the joys that it could have, and that's, I think, the contrast here. Okay, now I need someone else to read. This is on page 37. So right after this, right, he remembered all this, and he had the strangest agitation, sort of in the middle, a small matter. Someone want to read that? This is on page 37. A small matter, said the ghost. Go for it, Mason.
A small matter, said the ghost, to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. Small, echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the two princesses who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter self. "It isn't that, spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, pleasure or toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune."
Okay, good. So you get this. Remember, we talked about in William James, the contrast of like values, like what matters, what's significant for you. And so Scrooge is looking on this. The ghost says, "It's a small matter, to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." All right, like think about how easy it is. It's easy. Like here's Fezziwig. He made like the whole town happy, very joyful. Like he gave them a lot of joy for such a small amount of money. And Scrooge initially says, like, that's not a small amount of money. That's like $1,000 or whatever. And then the spirit says, "Shut up. Listen to what these people have to say. Listen to what these people have to say about Fezziwig." Right? You Scrooge, you stop talking about Fezziwig and listen to what these people over here have to say. And who are the people that the spirit points to? Scrooge himself, right? This is like what's kind of cool. It's like Scrooge is like, this is a waste of money, sort of. And then the spirit points to the younger Scrooge, and the younger Scrooge says, "This man is basically like a living God. He gives so much." I mean, he doesn't live on me, obviously, but this man gives so much joy. He's like the best person you could ever work for, right? And now you have this later Scrooge sort of seeing this as like a waste of money, whereas the younger Scrooge sees this as like the best use of money. And so, once again, it's forcing there to be a contrast. Like, look what this person thinks of him, and look what you now think of him. Someone's got to be wrong. Who's wrong here? And so I think this is why Scrooge then, right after this, the very next sentence, he says, right, it isn't that, said Scrooge, speaking unconsciously like his former and not his later. So he's now sort of returning to the mind, hey, I remember when I used to think this way about the world and about other people, right? And then he starts to say, the thing that was really moving about Fezziwig wasn't the fact that he spent a bunch of money, like haphazardly, but it was, as he says, he had the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant, right? It's impossible to add or count them up. It's as if he had spent a great fortune to do this, but all it took was for Fezziwig to be like a joyful person. It's almost like the real source of the joy wasn't that he threw out $800 to make this party happen. The real source of joy was that Fezziwig was just like, it was a joyful, no, you gotta stick with the season. He was a jolly old soul, and a jolly old soul was he. Right. So he was just he loved life. And if you're around people that love life, you're going to love life. But if you're around people that are cold-hearted, you're going to become cold-hearted. And so I think this is what Scrooge is starting to like recognize. Is like the thing that was amazing about this wasn't the fact that he spent this money. The real thing of value was this other thing, right? The money was sort of incidental to this. Is that now an expression of this was that he was willing to part with $1,000 to throw an epic party, but that wasn't the real source of it. The real source of it was something of a completely different value system, a completely different a good. There was a completely different good at stake here. That Scrooge has since forgotten, long forgotten. Yeah. Does that make sense? Any comments or questions about this or any of this stuff or anything in the ballpark of this story here? Chew on it for a little bit, along with your figgy pudding. Okay, so we'll move on. So then he goes. They go ahead again. They jump to the future. Well, not really the future, but they get closer, right? They're getting closer to the present. This is when he was a kid, right? He was a child here, and now they're approaching to where he is, which is why the ghost of Christmas Past says, "My time's coming up, right? I'm coming to a close." And why is he coming to a close? Because the past is, as they move forward, the past is almost done. He's almost moving to the present. Once the past hits the present, the past is no longer past. You're dealing with what's actually happening. Right? You're not dealing with the shadow. You're dealing with reality. This is like a shadow of what was, as the ghost says again and again. But there's two more scenes that need to be depicted here. And we talked about the one already a little bit, and that's the scene where Scrooge is engaged to this woman, and the woman basically says, it's like the breakup scene. This is painful. This is the breakup scene. And Scrooge doesn't think that he's changed at all. Scrooge is like, I'm the same person I was. I never once told you I didn't love you. I never once, took actions to depart from you. And the woman is like, what the hell? Of course you did. You didn't have to say these. The way that you can tell someone you don't love them is by loving something else more than them. And so this is what's happening with Scrooge, is he's slowly turning to something else of value, and it's actually becoming more valuable, such that his fiancée becomes, what's the word? Dispensable? He can dispense with her. Doesn't need her anymore. She's not needed to give him joy. She's not needed to give him any happiness. And so it's almost as if Scrooge has her around just because she's just there, right? Because that's right. And so it's kind of like Scrooge doesn't actually care for her anymore. And the tragedy is he doesn't even realize that he doesn't care for her. And of course she realizes this, and which is why she's like, I think this isn't working out. The woman basically, we find out her name's Belle, but she basically says, the problem's you, not me. Which actually is sort of the truth. And Scrooge just doesn't see it. And she says a bunch of pretty sharp, harsh things. One of the things she says, let's see, she says you've loved an idol, a golden one. She goes on to talk about our contract is an old one. Their engagement's old. It's almost like I got engaged to someone who no longer is the person that you are, right? Right. She says it was made when we were both poor and content to be so, right? Until in good season we would improve our worldly fortunes by our patient industry. You are changed when it was made, and you were another man. And Scrooge says, I was a boy then, right? I mean, I didn't know anything. Now I know. And so it's this idea that Scrooge he's not aware of what he's losing. He doesn't know what he's losing. And this is why the woman says this great line, which if you ever break up with someone, maybe it's worth using this line. But she says, bottom of 39, this is a soul-crushing one. Okay, she says, I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. Like, I still love the person you once were, but the person you are now is not that person. And then she says, the memory of what is past half makes me hope you will have pain in this. A very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly as an unprofitable dream from which it happened well that you awoke. Right? May you be happy in the life you have chosen. So it's sort of like, you're going to quickly forget this. You're going to quickly forget me, all this stuff. You're going to move on. You're going to, get wrapped up in your business and all this other stuff. And she's saying, but I hope that you remember at one point this event right now, and you're pained deeply by it. Not because I take it, not because she's like wishing ill to him, but she's like, you're choosing a life that she sort of is suggesting is not going to make you happy. And I hope at some time before you die, you come back and you think about what you've lost, and you are pained by that. And the irony of the whole thing is Scrooge is not Fezziwig. He wasn't going to marry Fezziwig, although given how he was described, I wouldn't blame Scrooge if he did. But so here's the woman, and Scrooge is looking back on the situation, and what is his attitude now? It's one of pain. The prophecy came true, right? She said, I hope sometime you're going to remember this, and you're going to feel a lot of pain for what you've lost. And now here he is, and it's true. He's remembering it, and he has this great pain. But that's not the last scene, and we'll say this, and then if you have questions, we can ask questions. But here's the last scene. They move to another Christmas, and this is a Christmas that Scrooge wasn't at. So you might wonder, why is this part of Scrooge's past? This is the Ghost of Christmas Past, which is supposed to show Scrooge what he was. But here's a Christmas. It's in a house. There's kids. But Scrooge isn't there. Why is the ghost showing him this past? Anyone remember? Or anyone can speculate? You don't need to remember because it didn't say explicitly, but you have to kind of speculate.
Could have been.
Because it's what could have been. Yeah, this is what Scrooge's life could have been. And why is that? Because the woman that's being depicted in this memory, is Belle, the same woman that he was engaged to. This is a great scene. I'm just going to read this little paragraph because this characterizes my house at Christmas time. So sometimes I forget that this is actually a happy scene. But apparently I'm told this is a happy scene. The noise, right? So they're in this house. There's this woman. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge in his agitated state of mind could count. And unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, they were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. That is often what is happening in most houses at Christmas, and if you have sort of a large family, you kind of understand that. And he goes on, right, to sort of depict this scene. And it's this scene which sort of seems like chaos. Like, there's a little kid that puts a toy frying pan in its mouth and almost chokes on it. And then the kid also swallows a little plastic, well, it probably wasn't plastic, but a fake turkey that was glued to, you think about like little kid toys that are like, like put on like the little kid like cooking thing. And anyway, so all these kids are like choking on themselves and like hitting each other, fighting each other, screaming and all this stuff. And the dad comes up with presents and they're all like clawing on the dad, trying to pull and look at what the presents are. And they're all making noise and singing songs, and there's this excitement, and the heat in the room is just so hot that you have to like open the window. And so Scrooge is given an insight into that. And he's like, hey, this is what you're missing out on, Scrooge. And now, that wouldn't mean anything unless Scrooge was able to think about what his Christmas was like. Think about what his current Christmas was like. It was one, he was by himself in this cold house, eating his soup by himself. No one was pulling on his coat, saying, hey. No one was caring about his attention. No one wanted him. He was all by himself. He had everything that he ever wanted, which was a lot of wealth for himself, right? And so I think the contrast is, look at what you could have had in comparison to what you do have. And the tragedy is, you got what you wanted, Scrooge. You did get what you wanted. You wanted this, and you got it. And now he's able to reflect back and realize, the problem wasn't I didn't get what I wanted. The problem was I didn't realize what I really needed. I didn't really understand what I truly should have wanted in the first place. Right? He lost sight of that. He forgot that, and so he sort of wedded himself to something, which when he got it, it killed him. Right? This completely killed him and destroyed him. And so he's left at the end of Stave 2 in just like complete desperation. I mean, he's like a guy that realizes, hey, you could have had a really great life, but you don't. Right, and that's basically where it ends. Is like, hey, life could have been so great for you, Scrooge. You had all these opportunities that were telling you, hey, look at how happy life could have been, and now you screwed it up, and you can't go back and do anything about it because these are the shadows. How does it put? These are the shadows of the things that have been, what they are. That they are what they are. Don't blame me, says the Spirit. And so Scrooge is here in complete desperation of, I know I'm dead, I know I screwed my life up, and I can't change that fact. And that's like the end of Stave 1, or Stave 2, right? Okay, and so this is why, like, in order to be resurrected, you got to know that you're dead. And Scrooge, clearly, by reflecting on his past, he has come to this recognition, I'm a dead man. I really am dead. I don't have a life that's worth living right now. Right, and there he is, and it's sort of a hopeless situation. But there's 2 more ghosts that come, right? But that might be part of the meaning of the past. It might be not simply that you get to like reflect on it and think about all the great things that have happened, but maybe part of the meaning of the past is it helps you understand what you lost, what you don't have. And you might wonder, why is that good to know what I don't have? Because then you can start looking for it, right? Then you can start to actually attain it. So that's where it's going to be happening in the next 3 staves of this story. So you kind of get a sense of what the past is, and then you're going to move to the present. So, okay, any questions, comments about this? We've got time for just a little discussion if you have.
So William James talked about how kind of having like depression or like melancholy can be really good for you. It leads you to like spiritual experiences. But it seems like so far in the story it's like all about being joyful. And there's not like a lot of room for that, like William James. Like I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I don't want to let the turkey out of the oven too early. That's like the Christmas root. But everyone knows the end of the story, right? And who is the most joyful person in the story, in the grand story, the grand scheme of the story? Scrooge. He's like the most joyful person in the whole village, the whole town, right? And part of that is, I think, due to the fact that he's the one that enters the real sense of death. He really understands what it means to waste your life away. And only when you understand what it means to waste your life away, I think, are you able to really take joy in the present, in the moment, in life. Right? It's kind of like if you've ever, so there's this great story about, and then I'll mention it, and then we still got like 5 minutes. But there's this author, I should stop talking about this guy because I always talk about him. Fyodor Dostoevsky. He wrote a bunch of great novels. At one point, he was accused of some crimes, and he was put on a firing line. He was going to be shot, executed. And so he was blindfolded. This is a true story. He was blindfolded, and they were up there, and they got the rifles up. They were getting ready to shoot him. And then along comes someone that says, wait, hold on. He's just been sentenced to Siberia for 8 years or 10 years or whatever it is. So this guy was going to get executed. This isn't fiction. This actually happened to him. So he was there counting his last breaths. He thought, this is it. I'm done for. And then all of a sudden he realizes, wait, life goes on. And I think when you have experiences like that, it doesn't have to be that dramatic, but when you have experiences like that, the meaning of life changes pretty significantly for you. When you realize this is it, I'm dead, right? Maybe you're like, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my family, I'm going to whatever, and then all of a sudden, once you sort of come to that realization, and then perhaps you don't, or something else happens, the meaning of your life kind of changes. It's different for you. Like if you have a kid that is almost getting ready to die, and then they get better, your attitude towards that child, or maybe children in general, or life in general, is completely different. Once you really face what it means to lose something, you know what it means to have it. So I think it is sort of consistent, even though we've only seen half of the story so far. So, yeah, good question though. Okay, well, I'll shut up. I'll let you go. You can go. We'll see you on Thursday.